Even though home is not a uniquely American theme, it does seem to be an important one for Americans. After all, the United States is a nation of immigrants who left their old homes to make a new life. For many who immigrated to America, music was certainly a way to maintain a connection to their culture, but it was also a way to communicate with people outside that culture. And for those who were losing their sense of connection to the old world, the new world offered new musical opportunities. American popular music became a way for people of various backgrounds to find common ground, to feel at home with each other. In this unit, we'll look at the various ways the theme of home was expressed in American popular music. One thing we'll notice immediately is that music about home tended to be most popular at times in American history when people felt distant from home. The idea of home became more important or more easily defined when the feeling of being away from home was most strong. Because nostalgia for home and being away from home are so intimately linked, I'm calling this unit Home and Away. We'll look at the various ways American popular music reflected feelings of nostalgia for home and explore some of the most popular ideas about what it means to be at home in America. This will take us from the early part of the 1900s to the World War II era. We'll begin our exploration of the home theme by looking at the commercialization of what would be called country music. In the 1920s through the 1930s, this form of music was promoted on record labels as hillbilly music. The name suggested that the music was performed and consumed by a particular group of people. Just as race records were made for the African American record-buying public, hillbilly music was recorded for rural whites, mostly living in the South. And, like race music, hillbilly music reflected a variety of performance styles. Some hillbilly music drew on the Irish and Scottish heritage of people in the Appalachian Mountains. Some of it had more of a blues influence, and some carried the stylized sophistication of Tin Pan Alley songs, suggesting a more urban approach. Let's list some of the dominant characteristics of hillbilly music before we listen to several examples. The style of singing was often plain-spoken, without fancy words or much melodic ornamentation. The melodies tended to be flattened so that it felt like someone was just talking, telling their story, simply and plainly. One of the characteristics of country music that distinguishes it the most is the twangy sound of the vocalist. This is the Southern dialect and accent that identifies country music as the music of rural Southerners or working-class Americans. It has gotten harder to tell country music from pop music over the years, but even still today the twang is often the clearest identifier. Part of that sound is the nasally vocal performance. The absence of vibrato tends to indicate the singer was not a trained vocalist and is just an average everyday person telling their story. This sound indicates the singer is not putting on airs. It lends a sense of authenticity to the performance. Early country music was composed of a few basic musical elements: the blues, jazz, parlor songs, and European folk music. European folk music was sung in ballad form, and country music follows this pattern. Today's country music still remains fairly committed to this form. Country songs are songs that tell a story. Many of the songs heard in hillbilly music reflected the same themes. The train was the mode of transport that could take the singer back home. The train whistle was a mournful sound of missed opportunity, escape, or a connection to a faraway home. Protestant Christianity was and still is a big part of many American lives, especially in the rural South and Midwest. Hillbilly recordings offered a range of interpretations of familiar church songs, often sung in groups with rich, soulful harmonies. Home, loneliness, and family were all common themes in early country music. There's often a strong sense of solitude in these songs, which suggests a distance from and longing for home and family. As your reading suggests, there are many economic, historical, and cultural reasons for this to occur in music of America's rural South. The last characteristic of early country music, which is still present today, is the tension between traditional and outside elements in the music. In today's pop cultural landscape, this tension can be seen in the questions about what is authentically country music and what is inauthentic pop country. Many country listeners prefer what they perceive to be a more authentic sound and are suspicious of or reject music that lacks this authenticity. This tension goes back to the very beginnings of country music, when it was introduced to the record-buying public as hillbilly music. By listening to the earliest recordings of country music, we'll be able to detect the source of this tension for ourselves. We'll use the examples of Fiddlin' John Carson and Vernon Dalhart. You may be able to tell just by their names and pictures which of the two performers will have a more authentic sound. Listen to each song and use the list of characteristics of early country music described earlier to determine who has the more authentic country sound and why. As examples of early country music, we'll listen to three of the most significant artists: Jimmie Rodgers, the Carter Family, and Roy Acuff. We'll start with Jimmie Rodgers, whose bluesy style, yodeling, and lonesome rambler image would influence many country stars, most significantly Hank Williams, who we'll study later. In Train Whistle Blues, the sound of the train whistle indicates the singer's lonely and desperate state. Rodgers is telling the story of many young men of the 1920s and 1930s who were forced to ride the rails looking for work. The song was recorded in 1929, just a few months before the Great Depression. Jimmie Rodgers died in 1933 and didn't have many years to enjoy his popularity, but his legacy has lived on in these songs that capture the despair and solitude of the Depression era, especially as it affected unemployed young men in the rural South. The Carter Family sang songs that the group's founding member, A.P. Carter, collected from small towns all over the rural South. A.P. would often alter or rewrite verses to make the song communicate clearly to a mass audience. One of their most popular tunes was Can the Circle Be Unbroken? This song depicts the threat of death against the unity of the family. Though the home on earth is broken, the singers suggest the true home in heaven awaits. There's an escapism in many of these early country songs, a reflection of American Protestantism that still can be seen and felt in American culture today. If you are suffering in this world, look to the world beyond, where all your suffering will cease. Roy Acuff played a big role in developing the country music industry in Nashville, Tennessee. In 1942, Acuff co-founded Acuff Rose Music, a publishing company that signed notable performers like Hank Williams, Roy Orbison, and the Everly Brothers. Like the Carter Family, Roy Acuff's own music also displays the religious fervor of early country music. Acuff's music often had explicit references to church and other biblical symbols. One of his most popular songs, Great Speckled Bird, refers to Jeremiah 12, verse 9, which reads, "Mine heritage is unto me as a great speckled bird. The birds round about are against her. Come ye, assemble all the beasts of the field, come to devour." The verse was written in the context of Israel's exile in Babylon, but Acuff interprets it, as many Protestant Christians at the time did, as a battle cry for the church. This interpretation of the Bible verse suggests the church, like Israel in exile, is surrounded by enemies that want to devour the great speckled bird of God. At the time of Roy Acuff's recording, Many fundamentalist Christians felt they were in a battle with the secular world, with the modernists. In 1925, the Scopes monkey trial had pitted creationists against evolutionary scientists. A substitute high school teacher in Tennessee had taught evolution in a state-funded school, which was against the law in that state. The trial became a lightning rod for a national debate in which fundamentalist Christians felt they were under attack by secular modernists. This image, drawn from the fundamentalist perspective, shows the danger of secularism as a slippery slope toward ultimate damnation. Notice the light at the top of the stairs shining on the step with Christianity written on it. If one rejects the infallibility of the Bible, if one thinks the Bible has errors in it, then one will tend to reject the miracles in the Bible, the virgin birth, Jesus as the Son of God, the resurrection, and move from agnosticism to atheism, represented here as total darkness. As you listen to Roy Acuff's Great Speckled Bird, notice many of the dominant themes of country music on display. Not only is it a so-called religious song, but it uses imagery of the Bible to reflect values of family and home. The true church is the family of God, a shelter for God's children who need protection from the outside world.